Welcome to Windows Server Networking for Network Support Services. In the last three sections of your Network Support Services course, you'll be covering all the various technologies that go into networking with Microsoft Windows Server. Virtually every network that we use, that is business network that we use, runs on Windows Server. It is a Windows domain. We create file shares, we have permissions, we have storage, we have ways to control remote access. This is taking the fundamental concepts that you learned throughout your Network Pro and Network Plus course and applying it to the nth degree. In your last three sections, we'll be covering three textbooks. 70-740, which is Installation, Storage, and Compute with Windows Server. 70-741, which is Networking with Windows Server. And then finally, you'll wrap your section up with 70-742, which is Identity with Windows Server. Let's take a look of what we'll be covering in these books. Now, understand that all three of these textbooks are available digitally only. You have to get a subscription, and then you will be able to access it on this website, vitalsource.com. Now, in our first book, Installation, Storage, and Compute with Windows Server, it lays the groundwork for how our server works. So, for example, in the first lesson, Introducing Windows Server, we will take a look at what type of servers are available for our installation. What are all the different roles and features? Understand that a server provides services, whereas our desktop computer provides a desktop environment for us to run applications. Two different functionalities. Our network that we create with a Windows domain is called a client-server network. And there we can provide access to certificate services, domain services, print and document services. So we'll go through and we'll look at this. Now, due to the current distance learning, we won't be working in Hyper-V. We'll be working in a remote logon that is called ACE IT Labs, and I'd like to show you that environment right now. Once you log in, you'll see your email address, and that will be here in your upper right. You'll click on that and give yourself a first name, last name, and save those changes, of course. When we look at our labs, initially you'll select a lab and then say copy to my labs. I've already done so. Once that's done, you click in the upper right where your lab number is at, and your lab environment then gets loaded. Initially, it will be that same dark green color that we had just previously seen. You'll need to click the Activate button in the upper left to enable your lab environment. Once your lab environment is enabled, please do not click Deactivate because your changes will be lost. As you can see, this currently has three servers available to it in 70-740 and 741, and then subsequently, once we re-enter into 742, we will have four servers. We have a domain controller and three member servers, and we'll be doing various labs in that environment. Now, in our classroom, we would use Hyper-V. And Hyper-V would give us a much greater depth of a platform, and we could run many virtual machines. We'll take a look at Hyper-V as we go through our lessons. I'll be presenting a blend of both Hyper-V and ACE IT. Some labs are based on us doing the work in Hyper-V. We can't simulate that in ACE IT because the virtual environment's already created for us. So in the context of the lesson that covers Hyper-V, or that Hyper-V technology, I will show you the steps in my own Hyper-V. Okay, let's go back and take another look at our textbook. As we can see, if we look at our lessons, we can see it introducing Windows Server. How do we go about upgrading or migrating server workloads? Configuring disks, implementing storage, data deduplication, and on and on. And then we see there are 4 lessons that cover Hyper-V, and here again I'll show you those on my Hyper-V because we can't be in the classroom right now. Once we return to the classroom, we will do all these exercises. Finally, installing the Windows Nano server. Here again I'll do that in Hyper-V so you can see the steps that are required for that. Storage spaces, and we'll be doing some network load balancing, some high availability and disaster recovery options. Now you'll see that that's 19 lessons. 70-740 has 19 lessons. So it takes a little bit longer. 70-741, as you can see, only has 13 lessons. And in that, we're going to be looking at how do we do all our different networking functions that make all those other things work. We'll be revisiting IPv4 and IPv6 addressing. We'll be looking at how do we go about setting up DNS and how do we configure DNS and all the various options that are available for that. We touched upon that in our networking section, but not to the extent that we'll cover it now. And then we'll roll into Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, DHCP. Yes, we have a basic understanding, but now we're going to understand how do we set that DHCP up? How do we configure scopes? How can we configure DHCP for failover? So if our one server fails, we have another server to take over its function and not have conflicts. We'll be looking at IP address management, IPAM, network connectivity solutions using VPNs and direct access. How do we use a radius server? That's our NPS. Distributed file system. Distributed file system is a hugely valuable asset to networks to be able to create redundant and highly resilient storage solutions. And then we'll wrap that up with some high performance networking solutions as well as determining scenarios and requirements for software defined networking. That's actually what we're doing when we work in a virtual environment. This is software defined networking. And once we roll out of 70-741, we'll go right into 70-742, which is identity. And this is how we create the basis for all these other things to interconnect. Configuring domain controllers, creating and managing Active Directory users or computers, creating those computer objects and user objects. How do we go about managing groups and organizational units that we place those users and computers in? And create security groups of how we manage our permissions and access. We'll be looking at how can we create service accounts and service authentication. How do we maintain our Active Directory? Because just like anything else, we need to maintain and make sure that it stays available. Active Directory in a complex environment, having multiple domain controllers, having child domains, and what the concept of multiple forests. Think of each one of our networks, each one of our domains as a tree in that forest. So we can have multiple domains be able to talk to each other within our forest. And then we roll into a very, very important topic, group policies. How do we create and manage those group policies? How do we make sure they get processed properly? And then within those group policies, we'll look at the policy settings and the policy preferences. Very, very detailed ways that we can control the environment and the access and the experience of our computers and users. And then we'll take a look at managing certificates. Every time we access a website on the internet, it's based on us having a certificate presented to us to know that we are accessing the authentic site. Well, we can use this same concept within our network so that a server could be authenticated by a certificate instead of having to produce a username and password. And in the same way, in your networking, you discussed 802.1x authentication. And this is the way that we can secure our switches and our wireless access points, for example, to know what is connected to what port. Well, using radius that we look at in 70-741 and our certificates, we can provide 802.1x authentication on our hardware devices and have seamless access to our systems. If you'll remember, our computers in our classroom are wirelessly enabled. We can connect to the classroom wireless without having to present a username and passphrase. This is done through the use of a pre-distributed certificate and 802.1x. So that's an overview of what we'll be covering in our lessons. I hope you'll find this enjoyable. I know I do, and I look forward to your progression through our last 3 sessions in network support services. Thank you.